Hello everyone, and welcome to this lesson on fundamentals of WANs and IP routing. In today's session, we are going to explore how modern networks communicate across long distances and how routers make intelligent decisions to move data from one network to another network. When we use the internet, send emails, open websites, join video meetings, or access cloud services, data doesn't simply move randomly through the network. Behind the scenes, routers are constantly analyzing destination IP addresses and checking routing tables and selecting the best possible path for every packet. Understanding this process is one of the most important skills for every network engineer. We'll begin by discussing WAN technologies. WAN stands for Wide Area Network, and it is used to connect networks that are geographically separated. For example, if a company has different offices in different cities, WAN technologies allows all those offices to communicate as if they are part of one large network. We'll examine traditional WAN technologies such as lease line connections, where service providers create dedicated point-to-point links between routers. When we will move to modern Ethernet WAN technologies, including Ethernet over MPLS, which are widely used in enterprise environments today. After understanding WAN connectivity, we'll move into IP routing fundamentals. We will learn how hosts determine whether a destination device is local or remote, how default gateways work, and how routers use routing table to forward packets toward their destination. We'll also discuss an extremely important concept in networking, encapsulation and decapsulation. At every hop, routers remove old layer 2 headers and create new one while keeping the original IP packet intact. This process is fundamental to communication works across multiple networks. In addition, we will cover subnetting concepts and understand why IP addresses are grouped into networks and subnets. This helps routers make routing decisions more efficiently and keeps routing tables manageable even in very large networks. We'll briefly look at routing protocols such as OSPF and understand how routers automatically exchange routing information instead of relying on manual configuration. We will also touch on supporting technologies like DNS, ARP, and ping, which are essential for real-world network communication and troubleshooting. By the end of this lesson, you will have a much stronger understanding of how remote networks communicate, how routers forward traffic, and how the TCP/IP network layer operates in real enterprise environments. These concepts form one of the core foundation of CCNA and are critical for carrier in networking and cybersecurity or IT infrastructure. Now let's begin with concept of WANs, which stands for Wide Area Networks. To understand WANs properly, we first need to remember what a LAN is. A LAN or local area network is network that exists within a limited geographic area such as a home, school, office, or campus buildings. Devices inside a LAN communicate using technologies like Ethernet and Wi-Fi. However, modern organizations rarely operate from a single location. Most companies today have multiple offices, branches, data centers, or cloud environments distributed across different cities or even different countries. At this point, LAN technologies alone are no longer enough because Ethernet cables and traditional local network connections cannot directly span hundreds or thousands of kilometers. This is exactly when technologies become necessary. A WAN or wider network is designed to connect multiple LANs across large geographical distances. One allow remote locations to communicate with each other and share resources as if they were part of the same organization network. For example, imagine a company with its headquarters in some city and branch offices in different cities. Employees in all offices still need to access to shared servers, applications, databases, cloud platforms, email systems, and internal company resources. One technologies make this communication possible by creating connections between routers located at each site. Unlike LANs, WAN connections are usually provided by telecommunication companies or internet service providers. Organizations typically lease WAN services from providers rather than building their own global cable infrastructure. Service providers use massive networks of fiber optic cables, switches, and routers to support customer traffic across long distances. From a technical perspective, WAN technologies mainly operate at Layer 1 and Layer 2 of the OSI model. Layer 1 handles the physical transmission of bits across media such as fiber optic cables, while Layer 2 protocols handle framing and data link communication between devices. One important concept to understand is that ones primarily connect routers, not end devices directly. Routers act as gateways between local networks and remote networks. Their job is to forward packets across the WAN toward the correct destination network. In this slide, we can see two major types of WAN technologies. The first type is traditional lead line WANs. There are the dedicated point-to-point connections between two routers. They are reliable and secure because the connection is reserved specifically for one customer. The second type is modern Ethernet WAN. These technologies use Ethernet over fiber connections and are much more flexible and scalable. One common example in Ethernet over MPLS. Modern Ethernet WAN allow organizations to achieve higher speed, uh, easier scalability, and lower costs compared to older serial lease lines. So overall, WAN technologies are the foundation of large-scale communication. Without WANs, remote offices, cloud services, and even the global internet itself wouldn't function the way they do today. A lease line is a private dedicated communication link that a service provider offers to connect to specific locations. Unlike shared internet connections, this line is reserved exclusively for those two endpoints. In most cases, it's used to connect to routers located in different offices, data centers, or cities. From a networking perspective, a leased line is a point-to-point connection, meaning it has exactly two endpoints. No other devices share or interfere with these paths. This makes it very stable and predictable compared to public or shared networks. One of the most important characteristics of lease lines is consistent bandwidth and performance. Since the connection is dedicated, the bandwidth is always available and doesn't fluctuate based on other users' traffic. This is why enterprises often use lease line for critical services like voice, video conferencing, bank systems, or inter-office communications. Another key feature is full duplex communication. This means data can be transmitted and received simultaneously in both directions. For example, one router can send data to the other while also receiving data at the same time without waiting or interruption. This improves efficiency and reduces delay in communication. Also, from a logical point of view, it looks like a direct physical cable between two routers. In reality, this situation is more complex. The service provider doesn't run a single physical cable just for the customer. Instead, they use their internal network infrastructure, including high-capacity fiber optic cables, multiplexers, and switching systems, in order to build a virtual dedicated path between the two locations. This path is configured in such a way that it behaves like a direct connection, even though it passes through multiple intermediate devices inside the provider's network. Because of this design, lease lines also provide a high level of reliability and security, since traffic is not mixed with other customers' data. However, this comes at a higher cost compared to shared internet connections, which is why lease lines are typically used by organizations that require guaranteed performance and uptime. In summary, a lease line one is essentially a premium dedicated, always available connection between two routers, offering stable bandwidth, full duplex communications, and high reliability by leveraging the service provider's internal network infrastructure. The most commonly used in data link protocol in lease line connection is HDLC, which means high level data link control. HDLC is a layer 2 protocol that defines how data is encapsulated and transmitted over point to point serial links. Since leased lines typically connect only two devices, for example, two routers, HDLC is a natural and efficient choice because it's lightweight and doesn't require complex mechanisms for multiple devices. In real-world networking, especially in Cisco environments, HDLC is often used in a Cisco proprietary implementation rather than the strict industry standard version. Cisco enhanced HDLC by introducing an additional field called the type field. This field is very important because it specifies which layer 3 protocol is being carried inside the HDLC frame, such as IPv4 or other network layer protocols. Without this field, the receiving device wouldn't easily know how to interpret the encapsulation data. To understand how HDLC works, it is useful to look at its frame structure. An HDLC frame is composed of several fields, each serving a specific purpose. Flag field marks the beginning and end of the frame. It helps the receiving device identify frame boundaries in a continuous stream of bits. Address field in lease line environments. This is mostly used for identification purposes, even though only two devices exist. It helps maintain compatibility with the HDLC standard. Control field used for flow control and error control mechanisms. It helps manage how frames are sent and acknowledged. The type field indicates the layer 3 protocol encapsulated inside the frame, such as IP. This is the key enhancement in Cisco HDLC. Data field is the actual payload, meaning the user data or layer 3 packet being carried. FCS, which means frame check sequence, used for error detection. It allows the receiving device to verify whether the frame was corrupted during transmission. One of the main reasons HDLC works so well in release line environments is the simplicity of the topology. Unlike Ethernet networks, where many devices share the same mediums, switches, hubs, multiple hosts, lease line are point-to-point connection. This means only two routers communicate directly over the link. Because of this, HDLC doesn't complex addressing schemes or mechanisms for handling multiple devices on the same segment. Compared to Ethernet, HDLC is therefore much simpler. Ethernet must handle multiple access, MAC addressing, and media connection, while HDLC only needs to manage a single dedicated communication path between two endpoints. This reduces overhead and makes HDLC efficient for serial WAN links. In summary, HDLC is lightweight and efficient layer 2 protocol designed for point-to-point lease line connection. Cisco's enhanced version adds protocol identifications through the type field, making it compatible with multiple layer 3 protocols while maintaining simplicity and reliability over dedicated WAN links. Originally, Ethernet was designed specifically for local area networks where devices are located within a limited physical areas such as an office, buildings, or campus. In that environment, Ethernet works very efficiently because it's simple, fast, and built for short distance communication over copper or fiber link. However, with the evolution of fiber optic technology, Ethernet was no longer limited to short distances. High-speed fiber links made it possible to extend Ethernet beyond a single building or campus. This led to the development of carrier Ethernet and made Ethernet a practical solution for wide area network connectivity as well. In modern WAN architectures, instead of using traditional lease lines or older serial technologies, organizations can connect their router directly to a service provider using Ethernet interfaces over fiber. In this setup, the customer's router connects to the service providers through a fiber-based Ethernet link, which provides high bandwidth, low latency, and easy scalability compared to legacy WAN technologies. This connection usually terminates at a location called a point of presence. A point of presence is essentially a service provider's local or regional access facility where customer connections are aggregated. When the customer's traffic reaches the point of presence, it doesn't immediately go directly to the destination site. Instead, it enters the service provider's internal backbone network. Inside the service provider's infrastructure, traffic is transported across a core network, which is built using high capacity routers, switches, and fiber optic links. This internal network is responsible for carrying data efficiently over long distances, sometimes across cities or countries. For the customer's perspective, this entire complex infrastructure is hidden, and the Ethernet connection simply appears as a direct link to the remote site. One of the most important technologies used in this type of WAN services is Ethernet over MPLS. Ethernet over MPLS is a method where Ethernet frames are encapsulated inside MPLS labels. MPLS means multi-protocol label switching. MPLS is a high-performance forwarding technology used by service providers to efficiently route traffic through their backbone networks based on labels instead of full IP lookups. This makes forwarding faster and more scalable. In an Ethernet over MPLS setup, when a customer sends an Ethernet frame from their routers, the service provider doesn't treat it as a simple Ethernet frame. Instead, the provider encapsulates it into MPLS label and transports it across their core network. Once the frame reaches the destination point of presence, the MPLS labels are removed and the original Ethernet frame is delivered to the remote customer router. From the customer's perspective, this process is completely transparent. It appears as if there is a direct Ethernet connection between two sites, even though the traffic is actually traveling through a complex MPLS based on backbone network managed by the service provider. This architecture is very popular in modern enterprise ones because it combines the simplicity of Ethernet with the scalability and efficiency of MPLS. It allows companies to use familiar Ethernet interfaces while benefiting from a powerful and flexible provider managed transport network. In summary, Ethernet has evolved from a LAN-only uh, technology into a widely used WAN solutions. So, thanks to fiber optic and carrier technologies. By connecting to a service provider's POP and leveraging technologies like EO-MPLS, organizations can achieve high-speed, scalable, and transparent wide area connectivity that behaves like a simple Ethernet link but operates over a MPLS backbone. Now let's go deeper into the fundamentals of IP routing and understanding what actually happens step by step when a device sends data across a network. When a host wants to communicate, it first looks at the destination IP address of the packet it's about to send. At this stage, the host must make a critical decision. Is the destination inside my local network or outside it? To answer this, the host compares the destination IP address with its own IP address and subnet mask. This process helps it determine whether the destination belongs to the same subnet or a different one. If the destination is local, The host can communicate directly using layer 2 mechanisms like ARP in order to find the MAC address of the destination device and send the frame directly. If the destination is remote, meaning it's outside the local subnet, the host cannot reach it directly at layer 2. Instead, it must forward the packet to a special device called the default gateway. The default gateway is usually a router interface located within the same local network. Its role is to act as the exit point from the local network toward other networks or internet. The host encapsulates the IP packet inside a layer 2 frame and sends it to the MAC address of the default gateway. Once the router receives the packet, it begins the routing process. The router examines the destination IP addresses and checks its routing table, which is essentially a database of known networks and the best paths to reach them. This table can be populated through static routes or dynamic routing protocols such as OSPF, EIGRP, ISIS, or BGP. The router performs a key decision-making keep called route lookup, where it searches for the most specific and best matching route to the destination network. If multiple routes exist, the router applies rules such as administrative distance and metric values to select the optimal path. After identifying the best route, the router determines the next hop address or the outgoing interface. The next hop is the next router along the path toward the destination. In some cases, if the destination network is directly connected, the router can forward the packet directly to the destination device without involving another router. Finally, the router forwards the packet by re-encapsulating it into a new layer 2 frame appropriate for the outgoing interface and sends it either to the next hop router in the path or directly to the final destination device if it's on a directly connected network. This process repeats at every intermediate router until the packet reaches its final destination. In summary, hyperrouting is a systematic process where the host decides whether to send traffic locally or to a gateway. And the routers then continuously analyze routing tables and intelligently forward packets hop by hop until they reach the correct destination network. When a router receives a frame on one of its interface, it doesn't immediately forward it. Instead, it performs a structured process to ensure the data is valid, properly interpreted, and correctly forwarded toward its destination. This process can be broken into four main steps. First, the router examines the frame check sequence, which we say FCS, which is part of the layer 2 frame trailer. The FCS is used for error detection and is based on mathematical checksum, cyclic redundancy check. The router recalculates the FCS based on the received frame and compares it with the value included in the frame. If the values match, it means the frame was transmitted without corruption. If there is a mismatch, the frame is considered damaged and is immediately dropped. This ensures that corrupted data never enters the routing process. Once the frame is verified as valid, the router strips of the layer 2 encapsulation, meaning It removes both the data link header and the trailer. This process is called decapsulation. After this step, what remains is the original layer 3 packet. The router essentially separates the routing relevant information from the local delivery information because the layer 2 information is only relevant for the current link. Next, the router examines the destination IP address inside the IP header. It then consults its routing table, which contains all known networks and the best path to reach them. The router performs a process called longest prefix match, meaning it looks for the most specific route that matches the destination IP address. This routing table may include directly connected networks, static routes configured manually, dynamically learned from routing protocols such as OSPF, ISIS, EIGRP, or BGP. Based on this lookup, the router determines the best next hop or the correct outgoing interface. The next hop is the next router in the toward the final destination. After determining where the packet should go next, the router prepares it for transmission. Since layer 2 is always local to each link, the router must build a new layer 2 frame appropriate for the outgoing interface. This process is called re-encapsulation. The router adds a new layer 2 header, attaches a new frame check sequence trailer, keeps the original IP packet unchanged inside. Finally, the router forwards the frame out of the correct interface toward the next hop or directly to the destination if it is locally reachable. One of the most critical ideas in routing is the separation between layer 2 and layer 3 behavior. Layer 2 changes at every hop. Each router rebuilds the frame because MAC addresses and framing are only valid on a single physical link. Layer 3 remains unchanged end-to-end. The source and destination IP addresses stay the same from the original sender to the final receiver. This is what allows IP to function as an end-to-end addressing system across multiple networks, while Layer 2 handles only local delivery between directly connected devices. In short, routes forward packets through a disciplined process. They first verify integrity using FCS, remove all layer 2 information, use the routing table to decide the best path, and finally re-encapsulate the packet into a new frame for the next hop. Throughout this journey, layer 2 headers change at every step, but the IP addresses remain constant, ensuring consistent end-to-end communication across complex network. IP addressing is not just about assigning unique numbers to devices. Its real power comes from how those addresses are structured into networks and subnets, which allows routers and hosts to make intelligent forwarding decisions. Every IP address belongs to a specific network. This grouping is defined by the subnetting mask, which separates the IP addresses into two parts. Network portion identifies the network itself. Host portion identifies a specific device inside the network. For example, in a subnet like 192.168, 1 and 0/24, all devices from 192, 168, 1 and 1 till 254 belong to the same network. They share the same network prefix, meaning they are logically grouped together. This structure is extremely important because it allows devices to understand whether another device is local or remote. When two devices are inside the same subnet, they can communicate directly with each other at layer 2 without involving a router. This happens because they share the same network prefix. They can use ARP protocol in order to find others' MAC addresses. Frames are delivered directly within the local broadcast domain. However, if a device wants to communicate with another device in a different subnet, it cannot do so directly. Instead, the traffic must be sent to a router which will forward it to the correct network. So the rule is simple: same subnet, direct communication, different subnet, routing required. Subnetting is not only about organization, it plays a major role in making networks scalable and efficient. Routers don't store routes for individual IP addresses. Instead, they store routes for entire networks. For example, instead of storing each IP addresses one by one, a router stores a single route like 192, 168, 110/24 via a specific interface or next hop. This significantly reduces the size of the routing table, making routing faster and more efficient. This concept is called route aggregation or summarization, and it is one of the reasons large-scale networks and the internet can function efficiently. There is a very important design rule in IP networking. If two devices are not separated by a router, they must be in the same subnet. If they are separated by a router, they must be in different subnets. Let's break this down logically. If two devices are connected to the same switch or layer 2 network segments, they must share the same subnet. Otherwise, they will not be able to communicate properly because they would assume the other device is remote and try to send traffic to a gateway unnecessarily. If a router exists between two network segments, those segments must be assigned different subnets. This is because routers use subnet boundaries to make forwarding decisions. If both sites were in the same subnet, the router would not function correctly because it would break the logical separation of broadcast domain. This separation between subnets and routers creates a clean and scalable structure. So switches operate inside subnets, so layer 2 communication. Routers connect different subnets, layer 3 communication. Broadcast traffic is contained within each subnet. Routing table remains small and efficient. Networks become easier to manage and troubleshoot. IP addressing works as a system that groups devices into subnets. Devices within the same subnet communicate directly, while devices in different subnets rely on routers. This structure not only defines how communication happens, but also makes routing scalable by allowing routers to manage networks instead of individual hosts. In large-scale networks, managing routing manually becomes extremely complex and inefficient. Imagine an enterprise or ISP network with hundreds or even thousands of routers. If an engineer had to manually configure every single route on every router, it would not only take an enormous amount of time but also increase the risk of human error and network outage. This is exactly why routing protocols exist. Routing protocols are designed to automate the process of learning, sharing, and maintaining network routes between routers. They allow routers to dynamically discover the best path to different networks without manual configuration for every destination. When a router is first powered on and its interfaces are configured, it automatically identifies all directly connected networks. These are networks that are physically or logically connected to its interfaces. For example, if a router has an interface in the 192, 168, 110/24 network, it immediately adds these networks to its routing table as a directly connected route. These routes are considered the most reliable because the router is directly attached to them, so no additional decision making is required to reach them. Once routers have their directly connected networks in place, they begin to participate in a routing protocol such as OSPF. Using OSPF, routers establish neighbor relationships with adjacent routers. These neighbors exchange information through routing updates, which contain details about the networks they know. Instead of sending full traffic data, routers only share information about which networks they can reach and the cost or metric to reach those networks. This process is called route advertisement. When a router receives routing updates from its neighbors, it processes this information and adds the new routes into its own routing table, provided uh, they are valid and optimal. However, routers don't blindly accept all routes. They evaluate the best path based on metrics such as cost, bandwidth, or delay in OSPF. Whether the route is better than an existing one, the topology of the network. This ensures that each router builds a complete and optimized view of the network, not just a random collection of routes. Routing is not a one-time process. Networks are dynamic. Links can go down, new routers can be added, or passes can change. Routing protocols continuously exchange updates to keep all routers synchronized. When a change occurs, routers quickly recompute the best path, so this process is called convergence. Path convergence is critical because it ensures that data packets are always forwarded using the most efficient and available path. One of the most widely used Internet Gateway protocols in modern networks is OSPF. OSPF is a link state routing protocol, which means each router builds a full map of the network topology. Routers use the map to calculate the shortest path to every destination. It uses a metric called cost, usually based on bandwidth. Unlike simpler protocols, OSPF doesn't rely on simple hop count alone. Instead, it performs intelligent path selection using algorithms like Dijkstra shortest path first. This makes OSPF highly scalable, fast convergence, efficient for large enterprise and ISP networks. Without routing protocols, every route would need manual configuration, networks would be hard to scale, failure would take longer to fix, and human error would be very common. With routing protocols, routers automatically learn new networks, passes are dynamically updated, network design becomes scalable and flexible, failures are handled automatically. In summary, routing protocols like OSPF eliminate the need for manual route configuration by enabling routers to automatically share and learn network information. Routers first add directly connected networks, then exchange routing updates with the neighbors, and finally build and continuously update their routing tables. This dynamic process ensures efficient, scalable, and reliable communication in modern large-scale networks. Finally, let's take a closer and more detailed look at some of the most important network layer related services and tools that are used in everyday networking. These include DNS, ARP, and ping. Each of them plays a different but critical role in making communication between devices possible and easier to manage. DNS is often described as the phone book of the internet. Its main purpose is to translate human-friendly domain names into machine-readable IP addresses. When a user types something like google.com into a browser, the computer doesn't actually understand domain names. It needs an IP address to locate the server. This is where DNS comes in. The process works like this. The user enters a domain name like google.com. The device sends a DNS query to the DNS server. The DNS server reaches its database or other DNS servers. It returns the corresponding IP address, for example, 142, 255, .1.2, etc. The device then uses this IP address to establish a connection. DNS makes the internet usable for humans because remaining IP addresses would be impractical. It also supports features like load balancing, where a single domain name can map to multiple IP addresses depending on location or server load. ARP is address resolution protocol, while IP addresses are used for logical communication at layer 3. Actual data transmission on a local network happens using MAC addresses at layer 2. This creates a challenge. Devices know the IP addresses of a destination, but they still need the MAC address to send a frame within the local network. This is where ARP is used. ARP works only within a local subnet and is responsible for mapping an IP address to its corresponding MAC address. The process works as follows. A device wants to send data to an IP address in the same subnet. It first checks its ARP cache if there is a MAC address of this IP address or not. If the MAC address is not known, it sends an ARP request broadcast. This message asks who has this IP address. The device with that IP address responds with an ARP reply providing its MAC address. The sender stores this information in its ARP table for future use. Once the MAC address is known, the device can encapsulate the IP packet inside a layer 2 frame and send it directly. ARP is essential because it bridges the gap between layer 3 addressing and layer 2 delivery. Ping is using ICMP protocol, which means Internet Control Message Protocol. Ping is one of the simplest but most powerful network troubleshooting tools. It is used to test whether a device is reachable over an IP network and to measure basic connectivity performance. Ping works with using ICMP protocol, which operates at the network layer. The process works like this. The source device sends an ICMP echo request message to the destination IP address. If the destination is reachable and configured to respond, it sends back an ICMP echo reply. The source device measures the time between request and reply. This allows Ping to provide important information such as whether the destination is reachable or not, round trip time, packet loss, etc. Because of this simplicity, Ping is one of the first tools network engineers use when troubleshooting issues. If Ping fails, it usually indicates problems such as incorrect IP configuration, routing issues, firewall blocking ICMP traffic, physical connectivity problems. To understand their relationship, consider a simple scenario. You type, for example, we type google.com, DNS resolves it to an IP address. Our device checks if the destination is local or remote. If local, ARP is used to find the MAC address. If remote, the packet is sent to the default gateway. Ping can be used at any point to test whether connectivity exists or not. Each of these components works at different stages, but together they make modern networking functional, scalable, and easy to use. In summary, DNS translates domain names into IP addresses so humans don't need to remember numbers. ARP maps IP addresses to MAC addresses for local delivery. Ping tests connectivity and helps diagnose network problems. Together, these mechanisms form the foundation of everyday network communication and troubleshooting in IP-based network. All of these concepts work together to form the foundation of modern IP networking, from physical connectivity to logical addressing, and from routing decisions to application level services. Each layer plays a critical role in ensuring that data is delivered efficiently, reliably, and correctly across the world. Understanding these fundamentals is essential for anyone who wants to build a strong career in networking, cybersecurity, or system engineering. Thank you very much.